The flames licked hungrily at the ceiling of La Maison Dorée as Faith Sullivan scrambled beneath an overturned table, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. She had come for a simple dinner, alone with her thoughts and a good book, but now found herself trapped in a blazing inferno with escape routes dwindling by the second. The smoke was thickening, turning the once elegant restaurant into a deadly maze of fire and debris. Gabriel Evans had just finished a late business meeting when he spotted the flames from his car. Without thinking, he ordered his driver to stop, leapt from the vehicle, and raced toward the burning building while his security team shouted for him to stay back. The restaurant was one he knew well. He'd considered purchasing the property last year, and he knew the layout intimately. As other patrons streamed out coughing and crying, Gabriel pushed against the tide, ignoring the heat that seared his exposed skin. Is anyone still in there? He demanded of a waiter who was being treated by paramedics, a woman. Red dress. She was in the back corner, the man coughed out. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Pulling his suit jacket over his mouth, he plunged back into the inferno. Faith's vision blurred as she crawled toward what she hoped was the exit. The expensive red dress she'd treated herself to a small celebration for her promotion at the art gallery was torn and singed. She could hear the building groaning around her, threatening to collapse at any moment. Hello. A deep voice called through the smoke. Is anyone here? Help, Faith cried, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. I'm here. A tall figure materialized through the smoke, moving with purposeful strides despite the chaos. Gabriel spotted Faith's red dress beneath the fallen table and rushed toward her. I've got you, he said, kneeling beside her. Can you move? Faith nodded weakly, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, Gabriel scooped her into his arms. Hold on to me, he instructed, his voice calm despite the danger surrounding them. Keep your face against my shoulder to filter the smoke. Faith clung to him, her face pressed against the expensive fabric of his shirt as he navigated through the burning restaurant. She could feel the strength in his arms, the steady beat of his heart despite their perilous situation. A beam crashed down just behind them, showering them with sparks, but Gabriel never broke stride. Outside, the night air hit Faith's lungs like a blessing. Paramedics rushed toward them as Gabriel carefully set her down on a stretcher, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. You saved my life, Faith whispered, finally getting a good look at her rescuer. Even covered in soot and with his clothes ruined, there was no mistaking the commanding presence of the man before her. His dark hair was disheveled, his intense green eyes locked on hers with a concern that felt strangely personal. Gabriel Evans, he introduced himself, then coughed roughly. A paramedic tried to pull him away for treatment, but he waved them off. I'll be fine. Take care of her first. Faith Sullivan, she replied, then winced as the paramedic placed an oxygen mask over her face. Miss Sullivan, Gabriel said, his voice softening. I'd like to check on you tomorrow, if that's all right, to make sure you're recovering well. Before Faith could respond, the paramedics whisked her into an ambulance. The last thing she saw was Gabriel standing in the glow of the flames, watching her with an expression that suggested he had no intention of letting her disappear from his life. Faith woke in the hospital the next morning, her throat raw and her body aching. The doctor informed her she had suffered minor smoke inhalation, but was remarkably unharmed considering the circumstances. As she tried to process the events of the previous night, a nurse entered with a massive arrangement of white lilies. These just arrived for you, the nurse said with a knowing smile. Along with this, she handed Faith a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a charm in the shape of a phoenix. The card attached read simply, "Rising from the ashes, G.E." Before Faith could fully absorb the generous gift, there was a knock at the door. Gabriel Evans stood there, immaculately dressed in a tailored navy suit that showed no evidence of his heroic act the night before. The only sign of his ordeal was a small bandage on his right hand. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his deep voice filling the small hospital room. "The man who saved my life is always welcome," Faith replied, suddenly conscious of her hospital gown and tangled hair. "Though you didn't have to bring gifts." Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes taking in every detail of her face. "I wanted to. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been rescued from a burning building," Faith said with a small smile, "which is considerably better than the alternative." Gabriel laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to chase away the sterile chill of the hospital room. "I'm glad to see your sense of humor survived intact." There was something about his presence that filled the room, an energy that had nothing to do with the expensive suit or the confident way he carried himself. Faith had worked in the art world long enough to recognize true power when she saw it, and Gabriel Evans radiated it effortlessly. "The doctor says I can leave today," Faith said, fidgeting with the bracelet in her hands. "Thank you for this, it's beautiful." "May I?" Gabriel asked, gesturing to the bracelet. When Faith nodded, he took it carefully and fastened it around her wrist, his fingers warm against her skin. "I thought it was appropriate. You were very brave last night," says the man who ran into a burning building, Faith countered. Gabriel's expression grew serious. "I couldn't leave you there." Something in his tone made Faith's heart skip a beat. This wasn't just a wealthy man making a charitable visit to someone he'd helped. There was an intensity in his gaze that suggested something more, something that both thrilled and terrified her. "How did you know I was still in there?" she asked. "One of the waiters mentioned a woman in a red dress," Gabriel explained. "I couldn't walk away knowing someone might still be trapped." Faith fingered the edge of her hospital blanket. "Well, I'm certainly glad you didn't. My red dress, however, didn't fare so well." "I'll replace it," Gabriel offered immediately. "That's not necessary," Faith protested. "You've done more than enough." Gabriel sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Faith, I'd like to be frank with you. Last night, carrying you out of that restaurant, something happened to me. I can't explain it, but I felt responsible for you in a way that goes beyond just getting you to safety." Faith swallowed hard. Was this really happening? Men like Gabriel Evans, men who, she was increasingly certain, belonged to a world of wealth and privilege she only glimpsed through the artwork she curated, didn't typically take an interest in women like her. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I'd like to change that," Gabriel replied without hesitation. "Have dinner with me tonight or tomorrow if you need more time to recover." Faith hesitated. "Gabriel, I appreciate everything you've done, but you don't owe me anything else." "This isn't about owing," he said, his green eyes serious. "This is about not wanting to walk away from something that feels important. I've made my fortune by trusting my instincts, Faith, and right now they're telling me I should get to know you better." The casual mention of his fortune confirmed Faith's suspicions about his wealth, but it was the sincerity in his voice that ultimately persuaded her. "Dinner tomorrow," she agreed. "But somewhere with excellent sprinkler systems, if you don't mind." Gabriel's laugh filled the room again. "I know just the place. May I pick you up at 7? Faith gave him her address, and with a promise to see her the following evening, Gabriel left. As the door closed behind him, Faith fell back against her pillows, wondering if smoke inhalation had caused her to hallucinate the entire encounter. The next evening, Faith stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the fabric of a simple black dress, one of the few nice pieces that had survived the fire, since they'd been safely hanging in her closet. Her apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a converted warehouse building, was cluttered with the art books and eclectic pieces she'd collected over years of working at Meridian Gallery. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, and she suddenly found herself seeing it through Gabriel's eyes. At precisely 7, her buzzer rang. When she opened the door, Gabriel stood there holding a small bouquet of white lilies to match the ones he'd sent to the hospital. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes taking in her simple dress with genuine appreciation. "Thank you," Faith replied, accepting the flowers. "Please, come in while I put these in water." Gabriel entered her apartment, and Faith was acutely aware of how his tailored charcoal suit and the subtle gleam of his platinum watch contrasted with her eclectic, bohemian space. Yet he moved through her home with easy confidence, pausing to examine a small abstract painting on her wall. "Interesting piece," he commented. "Leon Berkowitz." Faith nearly dropped the vase she was filling. "You know his work," Gabriel smiled. "I collect art. Not as knowledgeably as I'd like, perhaps, but I appreciate talent when I see it." "I work at Meridian Gallery," Faith explained, arranging the lilies. "I'm their modern acquisitions curator." "That explains your excellent taste," Gabriel said, gesturing around her apartment. "I'd love to hear more about your work." As Gabriel drove them to dinner in his sleek black Bentley, Faith learned that her rescuer wasn't just wealthy, he was Gabriel Evans, the shipping magnate whose Evans Maritime handled nearly a quarter of the East Coast's commercial shipping traffic. The same Gabriel Evans whose name frequently appeared on donor plaques at museums and charitable galas around the city. "Why didn't you tell me who you were at the hospital?" Faith asked. Gabriel kept his eyes on the road, his strong profile illuminated by passing streetlights. "Would it have mattered? It might have made me more nervous about saying yes to dinner," Faith admitted honestly. Gabriel glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then I'm glad I didn't mention it." The restaurant was an exclusive rooftop establishment with panoramic views of the city. As they were escorted to a private table overlooking the lights below, Faith noted the subtle nods of recognition Gabriel received from the staff and other diners. "I requested this table specifically," Gabriel explained as they were seated. "Notice the emergency stairwell within 10 feet and the sprinkler heads every 6 feet. Faith laughed, relaxing slightly. "Very thoughtful of you." As they dined on exquisitely prepared seafood, Faith found herself increasingly drawn to the man across from her. Behind the powerful exterior, Gabriel was thoughtful and surprisingly funny, with a dry wit that matched her own. He spoke passionately about his business, which he had built from a modest inheritance into a global shipping empire. "My father left me one cargo ship and a small terminal operation," Gabriel explained. "Everyone expected me to sell it and live off the proceeds, but I saw potential where others didn't." "That seems to be a pattern with you," Faith remarked, "seeing potential where others might not look." Gabriel's eyes met hers across the table, "Like running into burning restaurants." "Exactly like that," Faith said softly. "Tell me about your work," Gabriel said, refilling her wine glass. "How did you become a curator?" Faith told him about her art history degree, her struggle to find footing in the competitive gallery world, and her eventual success at Meridian. "I love connecting artists with people who appreciate their work. There's something magical about finding the perfect home for a piece of art." "Your passion is obvious," Gabriel observed. "It's refreshing to meet someone who genuinely loves what they do." "Don't you love what you do?" Faith asked. Gabriel considered her question carefully. "I love the challenge and the achievement, but lately I've been wondering if there's more to life than expanding market share and opening new shipping lanes." The vulnerability in his admission surprised Faith. This wasn't the confident billionaire who had strode into her hospital room, but a man questioning his path despite his enormous success. "What would you do if you weren't running Evans Maritime?" she asked. "Travel, perhaps. Not for business, but to really see the world." Gabriel's expression grew thoughtful. "I own ships that have visited ports I've never seen." "That seems like a waste," Faith said with a gentle smile. "Indeed it does," Gabriel agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. "Perhaps I needed someone to point that out to me." As the evening progressed, Faith found herself sharing more about her life than she had intended. Her childhood in a small coastal town, her parents who still ran a local bookshop, her dream of someday opening her own gallery featuring undiscovered artists. When Gabriel drove her home, the comfortable conversation continued. At her door, Faith found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "I had a wonderful time," she said honestly. "As did I," Gabriel replied, Would you allow me to see you again? Faith hesitated only briefly. I'd like that. Gabriel leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his hand lightly touching her waist. Good night, Faith Sullivan. Thank you for rising from the ashes with me. The next morning, Faith arrived at Meridian Gallery to find her boss, Harriet, in a state of barely contained excitement. Faith, there you are. Why didn't you tell me you know Gabriel Evans? Harriet demanded, practically pulling Faith into her office. We just met, Faith stammered. How did you know? Because he called me this morning, Harriet said, eyes wide. He wants to commission a complete redesign of the art collection for his corporate headquarters and his personal residences. He specifically requested that you handle the project. Faith sat down heavily in a chair. What? This could be huge for us, Faith. Evans Maritime's headquarters is that gorgeous waterfront building downtown, and apparently he has homes in the Hamptons, Aspen, and God knows where else. Harriet leaned forward eagerly. What did you do to impress him? I nearly died in a fire, Faith said faintly. After explaining the situation to an increasingly astonished Harriet, Faith retreated to her office and immediately called Gabriel. You can't just throw business at me, she said when he answered, skipping the pleasantries. Good morning to you too, Faith, Gabriel replied, amusement evident in his voice. I take it Harriet spoke with you. Gabriel, this isn't appropriate. People will think that I'm hiring the most talented curator I've met to refresh my sadly neglected art collection. Because that's exactly what I'm doing, Faith sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. You know that's not how it will look. Faith, Gabriel's voice softened. I've been meaning to update my collection for years. I'm not creating a job for you, I'm finally addressing something I've put off for too long. If you're uncomfortable, I can certainly work with someone else. The sincerity in his voice gave Faith pause. No, I'd be happy to help, I just don't want special treatment. Fair enough. Then I'll expect the same professional service you'd give any client, no special favors because we had dinner. Faith couldn't help but smile at his reasonable tone. Fine, but this has to be completely above board. Absolutely, Gabriel agreed. Now, about our second date. Over the next few weeks, Faith found herself living in two parallel worlds. By day, she met with Gabriel in his sleek corporate offices, presenting carefully curated selections for the public spaces of Evans Maritime. Their interactions were professionally cordial, with Gabriel deferring to her expertise while offering thoughtful input on pieces that resonated with him. By night, she discovered a different side of Gabriel as they explored the city together. He took her sailing on his private yacht, introduced her to hidden restaurants where the owners greeted him like family, and once, memorably, arranged for a private viewing of a traveling exhibition after the museum had closed to the public. How did you manage this? Faith asked as they stood alone in the gallery, the masterpieces surrounding them in the hushed quiet. The museum director is an old friend, Gabriel said simply. When I explained that I was interested in bringing an art expert who might appreciate a more intimate viewing experience, he was happy to accommodate. Faith moved closer to a particularly striking landscape. It's different seeing them like this. Without the crowds, you can really hear what the paintings are saying. Gabriel watched her, his expression soft. What is this one saying to you? Faith studied the canvas, the bold brushstrokes depicting a stormy seascape. It's about power and vulnerability. The sea is overwhelming, but there's that small boat still fighting against the waves. She glanced at Gabriel. It reminds me of you, actually. Of me? Gabriel raised an eyebrow. I would have thought I'd be the sea in this analogy, not the small boat. Faith shook her head. Everyone sees the power, your company, your wealth, but I've seen the other side too. The man who questions if there's more to life, who runs into burning buildings to save strangers. Gabriel's eyes darkened as he stepped closer to her. You see too much, Faith Sullivan. Is that a problem? She asked softly. No, he murmured, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek. It's extraordinary. When he kissed her, surrounded by priceless art and silent galleries, Faith felt as though she were falling from a great height, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Their relationship deepened as summer turned to fall. Faith introduced Gabriel to her small circle of friends, most of them artists and gallery employees who initially regarded the billionaire in their midst with wary fascination. But Gabriel won them over with his genuine interest in their work and his complete lack of pretension. For his part, Gabriel gradually brought Faith into his world. She accompanied him to charity functions where she met politicians, celebrities, and business leaders who treated Gabriel with a deference that still startled her. Through it all, Gabriel kept her close, his hand often at the small of her back, introducing her not as his art consultant but simply as Faith, who is very important to me. After one such event, as they walked along the waterfront near Gabriel's penthouse, Faith finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "Don't you worry about what your business associates think about us?" Gabriel stopped walking, turning to face her in the glow of the harbor lights. "Why would I care what they think about my personal life? Because I'm not. I'm not from your world, Gabriel." Faith gestured vaguely toward the glittering skyline. "I don't bring anything to the table that would benefit you." Gabriel's expression darkened. "Is that what you think this is? Some kind of transaction?" He took her hands in his. "Faith, do you know what I thought when I carried you out of that restaurant?" Faith shook her head silently. "I thought, I can't let her go. Not just I can't let her die, but I can't let her walk out of my life." Gabriel's thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I've built an empire by recognizing value that others miss. The value I see in you has nothing to do with business advantages or social connections. It's about who you are, your passion, your integrity, your way of seeing beauty where others might miss it." Faith felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you, Gabriel, and it terrifies me." Gabriel pulled her close, his arms encircling her. "Why does it frighten you?" "Because I don't want to be a chapter in your life, the interesting art curator you dated for a while before moving on to someone more suitable." Gabriel tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Faith Sullivan, I have never met anyone more suitable for me than you. I'm falling in love with you too. Actually, that's not accurate. I've already fallen, completely and irreversibly." As autumn progressed, Faith and Gabriel settled into a comfortable rhythm. She maintained her position at Meridian, but completed the corporate redesign for Evans Maritime, earning accolades from the board of directors, and a significant commission that she insisted on splitting with the gallery. Gabriel respected her desire to maintain her professional independence, never attempting to interfere with her career despite his obvious ability to do so. They spent most evenings together, either at Gabriel's waterfront penthouse or at Faith's more modest apartment, which Gabriel seemed to find endlessly charming. He learned to navigate around her stacks of art books and catalogs, while she became accustomed to the constant presence of his security team, who maintained a discreet distance, but were always nearby when Gabriel was in public. "Does it ever bother you?" Faith asked one evening as they cooked dinner together in her small kitchen. Having them watching all the time, Gabriel shrugged as he chopped vegetables. "I hardly notice anymore. After a kidnapping attempt in my 20s, my board insisted on permanent security." Faith nearly dropped the pan she was holding. "Kidnapping attempt? It wasn't successful, obviously," Gabriel said with a wry smile. "But it taught me not to be careless with my safety. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable." Faith shook her head. "It doesn't. I just sometimes forget that your life comes with complications." Gabriel set down his knife and turned to her, his expression serious. "Is that how you see it? As complicated?" "No," Faith said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I know what you meant," Gabriel interrupted gently. "And you're right. My life does come with complications, security concerns, public scrutiny, business demands that sometimes can't wait. I've tried to shield you from most of it, but I should have been more forthcoming." Faith moved closer to him, resting her hands on his chest. "Gabriel, I'm not complaining. I love our life together, complications and all." His arms encircled her waist. "Our life together," he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. The next week, Gabriel invited Faith to accompany him on a business trip to London. The Maritime Conference only requires my attendance for 2 days, he explained. We could stay for a week, visit the galleries, see the city. Faith hesitated. They had never traveled together, and a week abroad felt like a significant step forward. I'd have to check with Harriet about taking the time off. Of course, Gabriel said, watching her carefully. Is there another reason you're hesitating? Faith sighed. It just feels very official, like we're making a statement. Aren't we? Gabriel asked simply. I love you, Faith. I'm not hiding that from anyone, including my business associates. In the end, Faith agreed to the trip, and Harriet practically pushed her out the door, thrilled by her curator's romance with one of the city's most eligible bachelors. London was magical. Gabriel's business concluded smoothly, and they spent the remainder of the week exploring the city, from the grand museums to tiny galleries in hidden corners. Gabriel proved to be a knowledgeable guide, having spent considerable time in London during the expansion of his European operations. On their final evening, Gabriel took Faith to dinner at a small, elegant restaurant overlooking the Thames. As they finished their meal, Gabriel reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Gabriel, Faith's heart began to race. This isn't what you think, he said quickly, placing the box on the table between them. Or perhaps it is partially. Faith opened the box to find a key nestled inside. I'd like you to move in with me, Gabriel said, his eyes never leaving her face. I know it's soon, but I hate every morning I wake up without you beside me. Faith ran her finger over the key, considering. Her practical side noted the enormity of the change. Moving into Gabriel's penthouse would mean embracing his lifestyle completely, security teams and all. But her heart knew there was only one answer she wanted to give. Yes, she said simply. I'd love to live with you, Gabriel. His smile lit up his entire face. I was prepared for much more negotiation, Faith laughed. Were you going to offer concessions? Absolutely. A dedicated art studio space for you, complete control over decorating, regular escapes to your apartment whenever you need space. All excellent points, Faith acknowledged, but unnecessary. I don't need concessions to know that I want to be where you are. Gabriel reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I've never felt this way about anyone, Faith. From the moment I carried you out of that restaurant, it was as if something clicked into place, something I hadn't even realized was missing. I know exactly what you mean, Faith said softly. It's like finding the perfect spot for a painting you've been trying to place. Suddenly, everything around it makes sense too. When they returned from London, Faith began the process of moving her belongings into Gabriel's penthouse. He had already cleared space for her things, converting one of the guest bedrooms into a home office where she could work on gallery projects. I had the walls reinforced for hanging artwork, Gabriel explained as he showed her the room. I thought you might want to rotate pieces from your collection. Faith was touched by his thoughtfulness. You've thought of everything. I want you to feel at home here, Gabriel said simply. As Faith settled into life with Gabriel, she discovered new facets of the man she loved. She witnessed his razor-sharp business acumen during conference calls he took from his home office, saw the loyalty he inspired in his staff, and experienced firsthand the generous spirit that led him to support numerous charities without seeking recognition. She also saw the pressure he lived under daily, the constant demands for his time, the weight of responsibility for thousands of employees, the difficult decisions that sometimes kept him awake at night. Faith learned when to offer support and when to simply provide quiet companionship as he worked through complex problems. For his part, Gabriel seemed to bloom under Faith's influence. He began leaving the office at reasonable hours, delegating more to his capable executive team. He took genuine interest in the artists Faith championed, sometimes investing in their work not for financial gain, but because he believed in nurturing creative talent. You've changed me, Gabriel admitted one evening as they sat on their terrace overlooking the harbor lights. Before you, I was all about the next acquisition, the next market to conquer. Faith leaned into his embrace. And now I understand what I was really seeking all those years. His arms tightened around her. It wasn't more success or more wealth. It was a sense of purpose beyond work, someone to share my life with, reasons to come home at night. 6 months after Faith moved in, Gabriel proposed properly with a vintage Art Deco ring he'd found at an auction house in Paris. He asked her while they were visiting her parents' bookshop in her coastal hometown, dropping to one knee among the stacks of well-loved books. "I knew I loved you when I carried you from that fire," Gabriel said, holding the ring up to her. "I knew I wanted forever with you when you challenged me to be better, to see the world through your eyes. Faith Sullivan, will you marry me?" With tears streaming down her face and her parents watching from behind the register, Faith said yes. They married the following spring in a ceremony that balanced Gabriel's wealth with Faith's artistic sensibilities. The reception was held in a renovated warehouse that Faith had transformed with installations from artists she'd championed throughout her career. Guests included Gabriel's business associates alongside Faith's gallery colleagues, artists, and friends from her pre-Gabriel life. "You've bridged our worlds beautifully," Gabriel murmured as they shared their first dance. "Just as you've bridged the parts of myself I thought would always remain separate." "What parts are those?" Faith asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "The businessman and the man who runs into burning buildings," Gabriel said with a smile. "The person I have to be in boardrooms and the person I want to be with you." As they settled into married life, Faith and Gabriel established traditions that honored both their backgrounds. They hosted dinners for emerging artists in their home, creating connections between creative talent and the wealthy patrons in Gabriel's circle. Gabriel joined the board of Meridian Gallery, helping to establish an endowment that ensured its continued operation without ever interfering in Faith's professional decisions. A year after their wedding, Faith discovered she was pregnant. When she told Gabriel, his usual composure deserted him completely. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around their living room with a look of such pure joy that Faith felt her heart might burst. "A baby," Gabriel kept repeating. "We're having a baby." As Faith's pregnancy progressed, Gabriel became endearingly protective, insisting on accompanying her to every doctor's appointment and reading every parenting book he could find. He transformed one of their spare bedrooms into a nursery filled with handcrafted furniture and original artwork commissioned from Faith's favorite illustrators. "Our child will grow up surrounded by beauty and creativity," Gabriel said as they stood in the completed nursery. "And love, most importantly. And a father who runs into burning buildings to save people," Faith added with a smile, her hand resting on her growing belly. Gabriel placed his hand over hers. "I hope our child inherits your kindness and your way of seeing the world. Your ability to find beauty everywhere. And your courage," Faith countered, "your determination and your generous heart." When their daughter, Lily, was born on a snowy December morning, Gabriel held her with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Hello, my darling," he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms. "I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." Faith watched the man who commanded a global shipping empire completely undone by 7 pounds of newborn perfection and fell in love with him all over again. As Lily grew, their life expanded to include playground visits and children's museums alongside gallery openings and business functions. Gabriel proved to be a devoted father who could transition seamlessly from high-stakes negotiations to building pillow forts and reading bedtime stories. On the 5th anniversary of the restaurant fire, Gabriel surprised Faith with a weekend getaway to a coastal cottage not far from where she'd grown up. "5 years since I found you in the flames," Gabriel said as they walked along the beach, their daughter running ahead of them collecting shells. "The best decision I ever made was running back into that building. Most people would call that your worst decision," Faith teased. Gabriel pulled her close, watching as Lily examined her treasures at the water's edge. Look what came from it, though. Everything that matters to me in this world is right here on this beach. Faith leaned into his embrace. When I was trapped in that restaurant, I thought my story was ending. I never imagined it was just beginning. The beginning of our story, Gabriel corrected, kissing her forehead. And we have so many chapters still to write. As the sun began to set over the water, casting golden light across the sand, Gabriel and Faith called to Lily, who ran to them with her hands full of tiny perfect shells. Gabriel swept her up onto his shoulders, and together the three of them walked back toward the cottage, silhouetted against the fading daylight. Faith glanced up at her husband, still handsome and strong, still the man who had carried her from danger all those years ago. She thought about the journey they'd taken together from that fiery rescue to building a life filled with love, art, and family. A life neither of them could have imagined separately, but one they had created together, step by step. "Penny for your thoughts," Gabriel said, noticing her contemplative expression. Faith smiled, reaching for his hand. "I was just thinking that some people spend their whole lives looking for home. I'm lucky enough to have found mine the night you wouldn't leave without me." Gabriel squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with the same intensity they'd held when he'd first seen her in that hospital room. "I never will, leave without you." "I know," Faith said simply, and as they walked together toward home, she knew it was true. The man who had pulled her from the flames had built a life with her that was stronger than fire, more enduring than the wealth that surrounded them, and more precious than any artwork she'd ever encountered. It was a masterpiece they'd created together, not perfect, but beautiful in its complexity, rich with color and texture, and still evolving with each passing day. A love story that had begun in crisis but had blossomed into something neither of them could have designed alone. A partnership forged in fire, tested by time, and ultimately proven unbreakable. As they reached the cottage, Gabriel set Lily down and turned to Faith, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you, Faith Evans, every day more than the day before." "And I love you," Faith replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the last rays of sunlight gilded the world around them. "My hero who never left my side," Gabriel smiled against her lips, "and never will."